everyone. Welcome to Practical Pet Business. We know you've got a lot on your plate, very busy running your business, but Lauren and I really appreciate you taking a few moments with us. This is driven by conversations we're having with you all. And today we're going to spend some time. Lauren, I know you've dealt with this throughout. I have had different iterations of this, but that is identifying the pet products that drive the most traffic, as well as sales, as well as revenue. How did you go about doing that to make sure it was a fit for not just your store, but your customers and as well as your philosophy for your store?
Oh my gosh. We all know the big brands that are out there. So we all know, obviously, if they're the big brands and they're everywhere, they're selling, they're popular, right? But how much of the pie can you slice up? So I really approached this differently. I didn't really care. I would have brands come in and say, your competitor over here is doing really great with this brand, and this competitor over here really, and I was like, I don't care what they're doing. It doesn't matter. Their
Right.
customer may or may not be my customer. My demographic may or may not be theirs. Their whole store setup is different than my store setup. Our philosophies are different. Really strived to be a different kind of a store from what any of my competitors were. And I was so busy focused on what fit for us rather than whether or not this was a big brand in the area. I didn't really care about that. It's like if it fit for me and I thought that I could get behind it and I could promote it and sell it and the company was good, then it came in my store. But it came in oftentimes with contingencies and in very small amounts, and it was on a trial basis until we knew whether or not this was going to have any traction. Um, we didn't spend very much time, we didn't spend any time looking at what anybody else is doing. And it's frustrating for me now because I see in a lot of groups the question of, what do you guys find sells best for you? Well, gosh, that question is fraught with a thousand other questions behind it of what kind of store do you have? How many stores are around you? What's your demographic? What's your median income? What's your philosophy in your area? What's your philosophy as a store? Who do you identify as your customer? Which, believe it or not, is not everybody with a wallet. And a lot of people are just asking very broad, generic questions. And then they bring those things in and they don't understand why it doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
And I'm frustrated by that because with my consulting side, um, I'll have that conversation where I'm like, okay, well, you're just spent 15 minutes telling me what all your competitors sell, and I go, I don't really care what your competitors are doing. I'm trying to help you. So what are you doing? Why do you sell that? What kind of a deal did you put together for that? What kind of a trial basis did you give it? What kind of promotion did you give it? What exposure did you give it? What postings did you do? Did you move it around the store several times? I remember a food I brought in that I could not move to save my life. And I really liked this food. It wasn't until I moved it, I think the seventh time I moved it, that people went, oh, that's new. Oh, God. It really isn't, but glad you noticed it. And somehow that was the magic place for that. And some of it had to do with the brand's packaging at the time, which was ridiculous. But that's what I had to work with.
Right.
And it's more about keeping focused on you and what you're after than what everybody around you is doing, because all you're going to get is a little sliver of that pie. If you think you're going to take their customer away, you better have something very well known in place to gather that customer, because the first thing they have to do is leave that store to come to yours for some reason. And then there needs to be a really profound difference in what you're doing versus someone else. And if there isn't, then it's about price. And if it's about price, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I love that you boil it down really to that, and getting a deep knowledge of yourself. That's the part that often surprises me when I've had conversations across the board in the business side of the industry is that lack of understanding. And you've got the data. You got to have the data. You can't just have the top line numbers and make these decisions. Um, One of the questions I'll pivot to quite often is, what are your top sellers? And when people are buying those top sellers, what else are they buying with that? Because that's an indicator potentially of, should you have more or less of these additional categories. Because when you get to it, what I'll see quite often, especially in the pet stores, is they're predominantly very heavy in one area, and that's the consumables, but they're heavy in, maybe just the food. And they've got one or two things that gives them a side sale, if you will, an ancillary
Mhm.
sale. And there was maybe four or five other options if they were to talk to their customers of what they would have considered. They just didn't see it. So sometimes I love what you said. Hey, I had to move this 7, 8 times just to find the right placement. And that goes across the board. It's like, hey, am I giving too much space to certain things? Do I have enough pivots where they go, I like this, but I'm also having this issue, or I'd like to have something like this? That's one of the things I really loved about your store in particular. There aren't many stores where I could find the full range of products for the health of my pets, right on down to Bach flower essence. I mean, I was just like, wow,
All of them. Yeah, all
yeah,
of them.
and yeah, it wasn't just five; it was
Yeah, it was the full Bach flower, and it
a
was
line.
all the homeopathic options, all of the Boiron, all of
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and when I had a need for that, because Bella had a vestibular issue, I knew, and I will tell you this: driving to Lawrence was not convenient or close, except I got to see
For
Lauren.
you, for
Yeah,
you.
no, but in other words, like, I got in the damn car and got out there, and that is that. When we talk about loyalty, it's not because of price. Price is most often not the loyalty trigger that
It's
people think they
never.
have. Yeah. And yet that it's cited so many times when you talk to people. Well, we've got the best pricing. We've got the, and I just like, somebody, if it's a race to price, as you said, it that's a lose lose for everybody, right? But having that depth of knowledge, having a variety is what then drove that. So I love, it's not just, well, these are my best selling products. It's, these are my best selling products. Okay. Are they your best margin products? Do they generate other sales when those products are sold? Or is that a one off? I mean, there's so much more to be looking at. And the driving the traffic is one that, when I ask, how do you drive traffic? I mean, it's kind of a catch 22, right? Well, I have a sale or I have an event. And, again, it goes to that pricing talk. That's why you and I talked recently about, doing events and educational events and fun events and things that help drive, you know, within those, we weren't talking about having sales or discounts, or,
Mm-mm.
we were talking about engaging, building that loyalty, building traffic that is not just a one time, it's repeatable. And then the word of mouth. And I think that's part of this discussion here when we're talking about the products that drive traffic, that drive sales, that drive profit margin, and are repeatable. It is a whole cycle, and you've got to go through that process of identifying, is it time to add a new category? If I've only got one option in a particular category and it's not selling, is that the product? Is it the category? Is it my customer base? It's very difficult to identify, um, because of a variety of reasons. So you've got to have sometimes multiples, unless it is something so niche as the homeopathic. What you had was so wide ranging, but it was really, within one company. Um, and it was the one that most of us pet parents. So it's not about having, I got to have 20 companies either. And I hear people,
Mhm.
reference that as, oh, I make sure I've got 20 different brands. Well, as you and I have talked about, the reality in the co-packing world is, and I use the example in the CBD world all the time, where I can walk in and go, oh no, you have really one brand with seven different brand labels on it because they're all
Right.
using the same co-packer. Um, and so having that just goes back to that. I want to drive traffic. How am I driving traffic? I want to have these best sellers drive additional sales because I want to get to better profit margins. And sometimes you can't go, well, I'm just going to add an extra fee to X, Y, or Z product, whether it's competition, whether it's a variety of other things. You got to look at this in a cycle of, okay, what's driving the traffic, and where are my ancillary sales to this, and then am I making enough profit to have that be my traffic source? Because that's the other failing I see for a lot of folks is they'll talk about, well, this is my best traffic driver, and I'll go, ooh, that's a tough one because that particular category is driven specifically by a downward pricing pressure. We've got to address that. We've got to build out other traffic patterns.
I've worked with some retailers that they don't know what to bring in their store at all. Do I need to have food? Yes, you need to have food. You need to have food because you need that repeat. You need that repeat business. Well, then what do I bring in besides that? I've worked with really small footprints up to really large, and through all of them, the consistent must-haves are food, toys, treats, and chews. Beyond that, everything else is ancillary. Your collars, your leashes, all of your, oh my gosh, I had more categories of my store than I can even think about. But toys, treats, and shoes, they're impulse buy.
Yes.
Everybody buys them. They're for every animal. They're a constant add-on. They're never fails. They're your biggest profit margins. They're all those except for food. Everything else is keystone pricing minimum. So why not have those? You are without fail likely to get a treat, chew, or toy sale over anything else, collars, clothes, bags, harnesses, leash, over anything else re repeatedly than you are anything. So, if you focus on having good presentations of those things that are geared to the right pricing for your demographic, the right uniqueness, don't don't care what the competition carries. You carry what you can get behind. Nothing sells like passion. Nothing sells like commitment and belief. So if you really believe in something and you can explain why, that customers can see that, they go, oh, like the difference between this chew and that chew. I like this chew because it doesn't splinter and it's not smoked and the company is a USA company and I can give the reasons why I would pick this chew as opposed to maybe what they were giving that they bought somewhere else. I wouldn't bash the other one. I'd just say this is why I like this one better. And
Right.
people go, "Oh, I get a splinter? I hadn't thought of that." And same thing with a toy. I like this toy because it's durable. It doesn't look like it would be, but it's a tough one. And the price is right. It's not a $20 toy. It's a $9 toy. So if the kid does destroy it 6 weeks from now, it's not the end of the world like having a $20 toy destroyed within a week. So you have to be able to explain to people why you carry what you carry and your belief behind it. Otherwise, you're just a purveyor. You're just a
Yeah.
storefront. You're nothing special. You have to be special to survive right now.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think when you get to these things, I think most people understand that if you're running your business, you have to have that honesty side of things that you have that look in the mirror and go, okay, yeah, we tried this. We've done it the way we know our customers can, either gravitate towards it or not. Because that's the other thing too, is I'll see stores in particular that will hold on to something for far too long,
Ugh.
and it's like, no, I know this, or I believe it, and I'll be like, but just looking at your sales, it's not driving the sales that it should. And that's just, unfortunately, a recipe for failure and or pressure in other areas that is just, too often, especially in these times, overwhelming and hard to overcome. Your shelf space is your gold mine. And so if you're not utilizing that to the best of its ability, it's
But
really
so many owners know why they buy something, but the conversation isn't carried forward.
right.
That conversation doesn't get relayed to the consumer. People would come in the store and I was like, "Oh, want to see what I just got?" And I'd show them and they'd be like, "Ooh, that sounds yummy." I go, "I know, right? Here, take this for a sample. Try it out. Give me feedback." And I've got comes in six other flavors or whatever. So it's oftentimes not the owner or the manager, it's the help that doesn't have that passion, doesn't have that knowledge. It's the lack of conversation, the lack of engagement that results in, again, the loss of that connection. That disconnect is profound. And, it's easy to say they should know that, and they do know that, but I go into stores all the time and the disconnect is real. I'm not seeing conversations of that passion being carried forward.
Yeah, that's a sad thing too, right? Because we get excited about these things and we don't carry it forward in those discussions, not only with customers, but with the staffs.
Right.
You know, it's so important. I mean, they are an extension of you. And so you've got to share why this is exciting. I love when you were talking about the difference in the chews. Such a simple, easy discussion. Um, and it just builds that rapport for the more difficult discussions. And
Mhm.
so being there, being present, showing that passion for it is such an easy thing to do. It doesn't cost you anything. These other things that folks want to, I think we should, hold a huge event, or I think we should be doing, more advertising here. Those all cost money. They cost additional resource. Sharing your passion does not cost you anything.
Well, and here's what happens. People go to the events and there's still no relating going on.
Right.
It's a cute event. Your dog gets a treat. You get some little goodie bag, something like that. Everybody makes a fuss over the dog, but there's no relating. There's no connection. There's no continuity of, I knew my customers' kids, their fur
Right.
kids, I knew them. I mean, yeah, they'd come in the store and I'd be like, Daisy, Daisy would come running and then I'd wave at mom but I'd, be making a fuss over mom and mom would come in and I'd be holding on to Daisy while I'm talking to mom about want to see what we just got, or, oh, I wanted to show
Yeah.
you this new food, or I just got these treats in that would be perfect for her size, and carry Daisy around while
Yeah.
I'm showing, and there was a relationship there.
Yeah.
So it's selling without feeling the customer feeling like they're being sold.
Right. Right.
You're in my home. Let me show you what's cool. And then the customer's like, I want that. And it's like fabulous, and give
Right.
one or two to Daisy to try out and from the samples that you have up front and everybody leaves happy. Daisy doesn't want to go, all of that kind of thing. That is a memorable, you're first in their mind all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. And then all that other noise has zero impact on your relationship with that customer. Now, I love that. Hey, folks, we know you've got a lot going on. We really appreciate all that you're doing. Share your thoughts. How are you addressing this? What's your criteria? What's your process for identifying those products that are your best sellers, that drive traffic, that have the best ROI, best margins, maybe? Share that with us at practicalpetchat@gmail.com. Visit us on the web, all our social media different places. You guys have been remarkable. If there's a place we're not at that you want to see us at, please let us know. We're happy to do that. Thanks again for joining us here on Practical Pet Business.
Thanks, guys.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as, nor should it be construed as, professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment for your pets. Always seek the advice of a qualified veterinarian with any questions you may have regarding your pet's health or medical condition. Never disregard professional veterinary advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The hosts and the guests of this podcast are not liable for any actions taken based on the information shared during these episodes. Any reliance on the information provided is solely at your own risk. Copyright 2025 Practical Pet Chat, all rights reserved. Unauthorized duplication, distribution, or reproduction of any content from this podcast, including but not limited to audio, scripts, and show notes, is prohibited without prior written consent. The opinions and views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Practical Pet Chat.